The blood on her hands wouldn't wash away no matter how hard Penelope Parker scrubbed them in the basin, and she knew it wasn't just the rusty water from the pump that made her fingers look permanently stained. She had killed a man 3 days ago, shot him clean through the chest when he'd tried to force himself on her behind the saloon in Randsburg, California, and though the sheriff had called it self-defense and let her go, the whispers had started immediately. Now, standing in the cramped room above the general store that served as her living quarters in this dusty mining town, she understood with cold clarity that no decent man would ever want her. Not after what she'd done, not after what everyone knew about her past. The year was 1887, and Randsburg was experiencing its second boom after gold had been discovered in the surrounding Rand Mountains. Men poured into the town daily, their eyes hungry for fortune and their bodies hungry for other things. Penelope had arrived 6 months earlier, running from a failed marriage arrangement in San Francisco, where her intended husband had taken one look at her plain face and declared he'd been deceived by her father's letters. She was 22 years old, tall and angular where other women were soft and curved, with mud-brown hair that refused to hold a curl, and gray eyes that seemed too large for her narrow face. Her hands were rough from work, her skin tanned from the harsh desert sun, and her figure lacked the generous proportions men seemed to prefer. She worked at the general store, keeping ledgers and stocking shelves, sleeping in this room that leaked during the rare rains and baked like an oven in the summer heat. The shooting had happened when she'd been taking out trash after closing time. The man, a drifter whose name she never learned, had cornered her with whiskey on his breath and violence in his eyes. She'd carried her father's old pistol in her apron pocket since arriving in Randsburg, knowing that a woman alone was vulnerable. She'd fired without thinking, watched him fall, watched the light leave his eyes. Now she dried her hands on a threadbare towel and stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror above her washstand. She saw exactly what everyone else saw, a woman who had killed a man, a woman who lived alone, a woman no one would ever want. The knock on her door came just after sunset. Penelope froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. The knocking came again, firm but not aggressive. "Miss Parker, I need to speak with you." The voice was deep, rough as gravel, but somehow not threatening. She opened the door a crack and found herself looking at a broad chest covered in buckskin. Her eyes traveled up to a face that seemed carved from the same granite as the mountains surrounding town. The man stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that nearly filled the narrow doorframe. His hair was dark brown and fell past his collar, tied back with a leather cord. His jaw was covered with several days of beard growth, and his eyes were the color of pine forests. Those eyes looked at her with an intensity that made her want to close the door, but something in them held her still. "I'm Yates Yager," he said. "I'm a guide and hunter up in the mountains. I heard what happened 3 nights ago." "The sheriff said it was self-defense," Penelope replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I don't need anyone's judgment." "I'm not here to judge." Yates shifted his weight, and she noticed he carried a rifle slung across his back and a knife at his belt. His arms were thick with muscle, his hands large and calloused. "I'm here because you need to know that Marcus Gentry, the man you killed, rode with a group of outlaws operating out of the hills. His brother, Cole Gentry, is up there right now, and he's asking questions about who killed Marcus." The blood drained from Penelope's face. "The sheriff didn't say anything about that. Sheriff doesn't know everything that happens in these mountains. I do. I spend more time up there than down here." Yates glanced down the hallway. "Can I come in? This isn't a conversation for the corridor." Penelope hesitated, then stepped back. She'd already killed one man. She supposed her reputation couldn't get much worse. Yates entered and closed the door behind him, then removed his hat. In the lamplight, she could see his face more clearly. He was perhaps 30 years old, with weathered skin that spoke of years spent outdoors and a scar that cut through his left eyebrow. "Cole Gentry won't let this go," Yates said without preamble. "He's got maybe a dozen men with him, and they've been terrorizing prospectors and small mining operations for months. The sheriff can't touch them because they stay up in the high country, and they know those mountains better than anyone." "Anyone except you?" Penelope asked, crossing her arms over her chest. A ghost of a smile touched Yates's lips. "Anyone except me. I've been tracking them for weeks. I'm a hired gun for some of the bigger mining operations, protecting their interests. But I came down here when I heard about Marcus because I knew Cole would come looking. Why do you care what happens to me? The question seemed to surprise him. He looked at her for a long moment, his green eyes searching her face. Because Marcus Gentry was scum who got what he deserved, and you shouldn't have to pay for defending yourself, and because no woman in this town should be left alone when outlaws come calling. Penelope's throat tightened. She'd been alone for so long that kindness felt suspicious. What do you want from me? Nothing, Yates said simply. But I'm going to need you to come with me up into the mountains for a while, just until I can track down Cole and his men and make sure they understand you're under protection. I can't leave. I have work. I have nowhere else to go. You can come back when it's safe. But if you stay here, Cole will find you. He'll make an example of you, and it won't be quick or clean. Yates's voice was matter-of-fact without any attempt to soften the truth. I have a cabin up in the high country. You'll be safe there while I deal with this. I don't know you, Penelope said, but her voice wavered. The fear that had been sitting in her chest since the shooting suddenly felt very real and very heavy. No, you don't. But I'm offering you a chance to stay alive. That's more than you'll have if you stay here. Yates put his hat back on. I'm leaving at first light. If you want to come, meet me at the stable on the north end of town. Bring warm clothes and anything you can't leave behind. He left before she could respond, his boots heavy on the wooden stairs. Penelope stood in the middle of her small room, her mind racing. She could stay in Randsburg and hope the sheriff could protect her from men who lived outside the law. Or she could trust a stranger who looked like he'd been carved from the mountains themselves, a man who'd shown her more concern in 5 minutes than anyone had in months. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she packed her few belongings into a carpet bag, wrapped her father's pistol in a shawl, and wrote a note for Mr. Henderson at the general store explaining she had to leave for family reasons. It was a lie, but the truth would only cause more problems. Dawn came pale and cold over the desert mountains. Penelope made her way through the empty streets to the stable, her bag heavy in her hand. She half expected Yates to have been a dream or a cruel joke, but he was there, checking the saddle on a large bay horse. Another horse, a gray mare, stood saddled and ready beside his mount. You came, he said, and something in his voice suggested he hadn't been certain she would. I'm not a fool, Penelope replied, and I'm not ready to die. Yates took her bag and secured it to the gray mare's saddle. Can you ride? Well enough. He helped her mount, his large hands steady on her waist as he lifted her into the saddle with effortless strength. Penelope felt heat rise to her face at the contact, unexpected and confusing. Yates swung onto his own horse with practiced ease, and they rode out of Randsburg as the sun broke over the eastern mountains. The journey into the high country took most of the day. They followed narrow trails that climbed steadily upward, leaving the desert scrub behind for pine forests and rocky outcroppings. Yates rode ahead, his rifle across his saddle, his eyes constantly scanning the terrain. He moved with the confidence of a man completely at home in this wild landscape. They stopped once at midday to rest the horses and eat jerky and hardtack from Yates's saddlebags. Penelope's legs ached from the ride, but she didn't complain. She watched Yates as he studied the trail ahead, noting the way his muscles moved beneath his buckskin shirt, the way his hands rested naturally on his weapons. He was nothing like the soft merchants and miners she'd known in Randsburg. He was something wilder, harder, forged by the mountains themselves. Why do you live up here alone? She asked, breaking the silence. Yates didn't look at her. Because people complicate things, mountains don't. But you came down to help me. That's different. How? He finally turned to face her, and the intensity in his green eyes made her breath catch. Because sometimes a man sees something worth the complication. Before she could ask what he meant, he was mounting his horse again, signaling that their rest was over. They rode through the afternoon, climbing higher until the air grew thin and cold. Penelope pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, grateful she'd followed Yates's advice about warm clothes. The cabin appeared as they rounded a bend in the trail just before dusk. It was larger than Penelope had expected, built from rough-hewn logs and tucked into a clearing surrounded by towering pines. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, and she realized someone must have been maintaining a fire. You don't live here alone, she said, suddenly uncertain. I have a partner who helps with the hunting and guiding. He's probably out checking trap lines. Yates dismounted and helped her down from her horse. His hands lingered on her waist for just a moment longer than necessary, and Penelope felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. The cabin's interior was rustic but comfortable, with a large stone fireplace, a sturdy table, and several bunks built into the walls. Furs and hides hung from the rafters, and the smell of wood smoke and pine was overwhelming after the dust and heat of Randsburg. Yates showed her where to put her things, then busied himself with building up the fire and preparing coffee. "You can have that bunk there," he said, pointing to one in the far corner. "It's the most private. My partner and I use the others when we're both here." "Where will I wash?" Penelope asked, suddenly aware of how travel-stained she must be. "There's a creek about 50 yards east. The water's cold but clean. I'll heat some for you if you'd rather wait." The kindness in his offer surprised her again. Penelope nodded, too tired to speak. She sank onto the bunk, her body aching from the long ride. Yates moved around the cabin with quiet efficiency, and she found herself watching him despite her exhaustion. He was so large that he should have seemed clumsy in the confined space, but instead, he moved with a grace that spoke of perfect awareness of his body and his environment. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked quietly. Yates stopped what he was doing and turned to face her. The firelight cast shadows across his rugged features, making him look even more formidable. "Because when I heard what happened to you, heard how you defended yourself, and then listened to the town gossip about you like you'd done something wrong, I knew I had to help. I've seen too many good people destroyed by circumstances beyond their control. You don't know if I'm a good person. I know you killed a man who was trying to hurt you. I know you didn't run or hide from what you'd done. I know you had the courage to come with a stranger into the mountains because you understood the danger you were in." He crossed the cabin to stand in front of her, and she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "That tells me enough. The town thinks I'm ruined now. No decent man will want me." The words slipped out before she could stop them, revealing the fear that had been eating at her since the shooting. Yates's expression softened in a way that transformed his hard features into something almost tender. "Then the men in that town are fools," he said quietly. Penelope felt tears prick her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. She turned her face away, but Yates reached out and gently caught her chin, turning her back to face him. His hand was rough but surprisingly gentle. "You listen to me, Penelope Parker. What you did took courage. Any man worth having would see that, and any man who judges you for defending your life isn't worth a moment of your time." "Then I'll be alone forever," she whispered, "because that describes every man I've ever met." Yates was quiet for a long moment, his green eyes searching her face. Then he said, his voice low and rough, "Not every man." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Penelope's heart began to pound, and she couldn't look away from his intense gaze. She saw something in his eyes that she'd never seen directed at her before. Want. Not the crude, violent desire of Marcus Gentry, but something deeper and more genuine. The cabin door burst open, shattering the moment. A man stumbled in, breathing hard, his face flushed with exertion. He was shorter than Yates, but powerfully built, with red hair and a thick beard. "We've got trouble," he said without preamble. "Cole Gentry and his boys are asking about you at every mining camp between here and Randsburg. They know someone's helping the woman who killed Marcus." Yates's expression hardened instantly, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. "How close are they?" "Maybe a day behind if they're following the main trails, but they're spreading out, searching. It's only a matter of time before someone tells them about this cabin." "Then we move higher. There's that old mining camp up near the pass. It's defensible, and no one's been there in years." Yates turned to Penelope. "I'm sorry. We're going to have to move again at first light." The red-haired man finally seemed to notice Penelope. His eyes widened slightly, then he extended a hand. "Name's Jack Sullivan. I help Yates with his work up here." Penelope shook his hand, noting the way Jack's gaze moved between her and Yates with open curiosity. "Penelope Parker. The woman who shot Marcus Gentry. Heard about that. Good riddance to bad trash, if you ask me." Jack moved to the fire, warming his hands. "But his brother's a different sort. Cole's mean, and he's smart. He won't give up easy." "He'll give up when I give him a reason to," Yates said, his voice flat and cold in a way that made Penelope shiver. This was the side of him that made sense, the killer who survived in these harsh mountains. They ate a simple meal of beans and cornbread. Then Jack excused himself to check on the horses. Yates heated water for Penelope as promised, pouring it into a large basin and setting it behind a canvas screen he rigged in the corner. "It's not much privacy, but it's better than nothing," he said. Penelope waited until he'd moved to the other side of the cabin before undressing and washing quickly in the warm water. She could hear Yates moving around, the creak of the floorboards, the clink of metal on metal as he cleaned his weapons. The domesticity of the sounds was oddly comforting despite the circumstances. When she emerged in her nightdress with her shawl wrapped around her shoulders, she found Yates sitting at the table, his rifle disassembled in front of him. He looked up, and his eyes traveled over her in a way that made her acutely aware of how thin the fabric of her nightdress was. "You should sleep," he said, his voice rougher than before. "We'll be leaving early." Penelope climbed into the bunk he'd assigned her, pulling the heavy fur blanket over her body. The bed smelled of pine and wood smoke and something masculine that she thought might be Yates himself. She watched as he continued working on his weapons, his large hands moving with practiced precision. "Yates?" she said softly into the darkness. "Yeah?" "Thank you. For helping me. For believing me." He was quiet for so long she thought he might not respond. Then he said, "Get some rest, Penelope. Tomorrow's going to be hard." But sleep wouldn't come easily. Penelope lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the cabin settling and the wind in the pines outside. She thought about the way Yates had looked at her, the words he'd spoken. Not every man. Did he mean himself? And if he did, what did that mean for her? She was ruined in the eyes of society, damaged goods fleeing into the mountains with a man she barely knew. Yet she felt safer here than she had in months, safer than she'd felt in Randsburg, safer than she'd felt in San Francisco before that. Yates Yager, with his massive frame and his weapons and his rough mountain ways, made her feel protected in a way she'd never experienced before. She must have finally slept because the next thing she knew, Yates was gently shaking her shoulder. "Time to go," he said quietly. "Jack's already saddled the horses." The pre-dawn air was bitterly cold. Penelope dressed quickly, her fingers fumbling with buttons and laces. When she emerged from behind the screen, Yates handed her a tin cup of strong black coffee and a piece of hardtack. "Eat fast. We need to be gone before full light." They rode out as the sky turned from black to gray. This time, the trail was even steeper and more treacherous, winding through narrow defiles and across loose scree that made the horses nervous. Jack rode behind them, occasionally stopping to obscure their tracks. Penelope's hands were numb on the reins despite her gloves, and her face felt frozen in the mountain wind. By mid-morning they'd climbed above the tree line into a landscape of bare rock and patches of old snow. The mining camp appeared around noon, a collection of dilapidated buildings clustered around the entrance to a played-out mine shaft. Most of the roofs had collapsed, but one cabin still looked relatively intact. "This will do," Yates said, dismounting. "Jack, take the horses up to that box canyon we used last winter. Keep them out of sight." Jack nodded and gathered the reins, leading all three horses away. Yates helped Penelope down from her mare, and she stumbled, her legs cramping from the cold and the long ride. Yates caught her easily, his strong arms steadying her. "Easy," he murmured. "You're doing good, better than most men I've brought up here." The praise warmed her more than it should have. Together, they made their way into the intact cabin. It was bare inside except for some old crates and a broken stove, but the roof was solid and the walls blocked the worst of the wind. Yates immediately began preparing the space, moving with the efficiency of long practice. "We'll hole up here for a few days," he said. "If Cole and his men come up this high, we'll see them long before they see us. And if they don't, we'll know they've given up and moved on." "And then what?" Penelope asked. Yates stopped what he was doing and looked at her. "Then I take you somewhere safe, somewhere you can start over." "Where would that be? I have no money, no family, no prospects." "We'll figure something out." The certainty in his voice made her want to believe him, but Penelope had learned long ago that life rarely worked out the way you hoped. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite her layers of clothing. Yates noticed and moved closer. "You're freezing. Come here." Before she could protest, he'd pulled her against his chest, wrapping his arms around her. The heat of his body was immediate and overwhelming. Penelope stiffened at first, unused to such close contact, but gradually she relaxed into his embrace. Through the layers of clothing she could feel the solid muscle of his chest and arms, could hear the steady beat of his heart. "Is this appropriate?" she asked, her voice muffled against his buckskin shirt. "Probably not, but I'm not letting you freeze to death for the sake of propriety." His arms tightened slightly. "Besides, your reputation's already shot, remember? Might as well be warm." The dark humor in his voice surprised a laugh out of her. "That's terrible logic." "Maybe, but you're not pulling away." He was right. She wasn't. In fact, she was pressing closer, seeking more of his warmth and his strength. They stood like that for a long time, and gradually Penelope became aware that what she felt wasn't just gratitude or the need for warmth. Something else was building between them, something that made her pulse quicken and her breath shallow. "Yates," she whispered. "I know," he said roughly. His hand came up to cup the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair. "I feel it too." He pulled back just enough to look down at her, and the expression on his face stole her breath. There was desire there, yes, but also something softer, something almost reverent. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, and she shivered again, but not from cold. "You're beautiful," he said quietly. Penelope shook her head. "I'm not. I've never been beautiful. That's why my intended in San Francisco rejected me. That's why no man has ever wanted me. Then every man you've met has been blind." Yates's hand moved to cup her face, his large palm rough against her skin. "I see strength in you. Courage, fire. That's worth 100 pretty faces. You barely know me. I know enough. I know I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since I saw you standing in that doorway last night. I know I'd face down Cole Gentry and every outlaw in these mountains to keep you safe. I know that when I look at you, I see everything I've been missing in my life up here." His words broke something open inside her, some carefully guarded place where she'd locked away all her hopes and dreams. "I killed a man," she said, her voice breaking. "I shot him and watched him die, and I don't even feel sorry about it. What does that make me?" "Human," Yates said simply. "Strong. Alive. It makes you alive, Penelope." Then he was kissing her, his lips surprisingly gentle despite the roughness of his beard. Penelope gasped against his mouth, and he took the opportunity to deepen the kiss, his tongue sliding against hers in a way that made heat pool low in her belly. She'd been kissed before, awkward fumbling attempts by boys who thought she should be grateful for their attention. This was nothing like that. This was consuming, overwhelming, perfect. When he finally pulled away, they were both breathing hard. Yates rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "I shouldn't have done that," he said. "You're under my protection. I shouldn't take advantage." "You're not," Penelope said fiercely. She grabbed the front of his shirt, holding him in place. "You're not taking advantage. I wanted it. I want you." His eyes opened, and the heat in them made her weak. "Penelope, if we do this, there's no going back. I'm not a man who plays games. If I take you, you're mine. Forever." The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it thrilled her. "Then take me," she whispered. "I want to be yours." Yates groaned, a sound of surrender and desire mixed together. He kissed her again, harder this time, his hands moving over her body with urgent need. Penelope responded with equal fervor, her own hands exploring the planes of his muscular back and shoulders. He was so solid, so strong, and she wanted to drown in him. The cabin door banged open and they sprang apart. Jack stood in the doorway, his expression apologetic but urgent. "Sorry to interrupt, but we've got movement on the trail below. 4 riders, maybe 5, heading this way." Yates's entire demeanor changed instantly, the passionate lover replaced by the hard mountain man. "How far?" "Hour, maybe less. They're moving slow, searching. Get the rifles ready." "We'll make our stand here." Yates turned to Penelope, his face grim. "Get behind those crates in the corner. Whatever happens, stay down and stay quiet." "I can shoot," Penelope said. "I killed Marcus Gentry, remember? This is different. These men are experienced killers and there are multiple targets. Just stay down." When she opened her mouth to argue, he cupped her face in his hands. "Please, Penelope. I can't focus on what needs to happen if I'm worrying about you getting hurt." The raw emotion in his voice convinced her. She nodded and moved to the corner, crouching behind the stack of old crates. Yates and Jack took up positions at the two small windows, their rifles at the ready. The waiting was agonizing. Penelope could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, could feel the weight of her father's pistol in her pocket. Through the gaps in the crates, she watched Yates's broad back, the way his muscles tensed as he scanned the approach to the cabin. "There," Jack said quietly. "5 riders. Cole's in front. I recognize him from the wanted posters." "Let them get close," Yates replied, "but not too close. I'll do the talking." The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, then stopped. A voice called out, rough and mean-sounding. "We know someone's in there. We've been following your tracks for 2 days." Yates raised his voice to Carrie. "This is private property. You're trespassing." A harsh laugh answered him. "Private property? This is abandoned mining claim, and we're just passing through. Unless you're hiding something you don't want us to see. I'm telling you once to move on. If you don't, you'll regret it. Big talk from someone hiding in a shack. You got something in there that belongs to me? Maybe a murdering woman who shot my brother?" Penelope's blood ran cold. Cole Gentry had found them. "I don't know what you're talking about," Yates called back. "Now ride on before this gets ugly." "Not until I get what I came for. Marcus was my blood. The woman who killed him owes a debt, and I aim to collect." "Marcus got what he deserved when he tried to force himself on a woman. If you're looking for justice, you're looking at the wrong person." "Justice?" Cole's voice rose, angry now. "There's no justice for men like us. There's only revenge. Now send the woman out, and maybe I'll let you and your friend ride away." Yates's response was to fire a shot that kicked up dirt inches from the lead horse's hooves. The animal reared, and the clearing erupted in chaos. The outlaws scattered, diving for cover and returning fire. Bullets slammed into the cabin walls, and one shattered the window next to Jack, showering him with glass. "Stay down!" Yates shouted to Penelope as he fired again. Through the gunsmoke, she saw one of the outlaws fall from his horse, clutching his shoulder. The battle was short but intense. Yates and Jack fired with devastating accuracy, each shot carefully aimed. The outlaws, caught in the open with limited cover, quickly realized they were at a disadvantage. Another man went down, this one not moving after he hit the ground. "Fall back!" Cole's voice rang out. "Fall back!" The remaining outlaws retreated down the trail, dragging their wounded with them. Yates kept his rifle trained on the trail long after they disappeared from sight. "They'll be back," Jack said, reloading his rifle. "Cole won't give up that easy." "I know," Yates replied, "but now he knows we're serious, and he's down 2 men. That'll make him think twice." He turned to check on Penelope, his face transforming from hard and cold to concerned in an instant. "You all right?" She nodded, unable to speak. The violence had been sudden and terrifying, nothing like the single desperate shot that had killed Marcus Gentry. Yates crossed the cabin and pulled her to her feet, checking her over for injuries despite her protests. "I'm fine," she finally managed. "You protected me." "Always," he said fiercely. "I'll always protect you." Jack cleared his throat. "We should move. They'll come back with more men, maybe try to surround us. This position isn't defensible against a larger force." Yates nodded reluctantly. "You're right. We'll head higher, up to the old shepherd's shelter near the peak. It's a hard climb, but there's only one approach and we can hold it indefinitely." They gathered their supplies quickly and retrieved the horses from the box canyon where Jack had hidden them. The climb to the shepherd's shelter was brutal, following a trail so narrow that they had to lead the horses single file with the cliff wall on one side and a sheer drop on the other. Penelope's legs trembled with exhaustion, and twice she nearly lost her footing. Each time Yates was there, his strong hand steadying her. The shelter was little more than a stone hut built into the side of the mountain, but it was solid and well-positioned. From here they could see for miles in every direction. Any approach would be visible long before it became a threat. "We can hold here," Yates said with satisfaction. "Jack, you take first watch. Wake me in 4 hours." As darkness fell, Yates built a small fire using dried dung and scraps of wood, enough to warm them without creating much smoke. Penelope huddled close to the flames, her body aching from the long day. Jack dozed in the doorway, his rifle across his knees. Yates sat beside Penelope, close enough that their shoulders touched. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. I'm sorry I brought you into this." "You saved my life," she replied. "If I'd stayed in Randsburg, Cole would have found me with no one to protect me." "Still, you deserve better than running through the mountains, getting shot at by outlaws." Penelope turned to look at him, studying his profile in the firelight. "What do I deserve then?" "Peace, safety, a home." He paused, then added so quietly she almost missed it. "Love." Her breath caught. "Yates, I meant what I said before, back in the cabin. I want you, Penelope, not just for now, not just until this is over. I want you forever. I want to build a life with you, up here in these mountains or down in the valleys or wherever you want to go. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to protect you and provide for you and make you happy." Tears streamed down Penelope's face. "No man has ever wanted me," she whispered. "Not like that, not forever." Yates turned to face her fully, his large hands cupping her face, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "Then they were all fools," he said fiercely. "Because you're everything, Penelope Parker. You're strong and brave and beautiful, and I want you forevermore." The echo of her own earlier words struck her heart like an arrow. She threw her arms around his neck, kissing him with all the pent-up longing and fear and hope that had been building inside her. Yates responded immediately, pulling her into his lap and holding her as if she were something precious and fragile, despite her earlier display of strength. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "When this is over, when you're safe, marry me. Let me spend the rest of my life showing you what it means to be wanted." "Yes," Penelope said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you." They held each other in the firelight, and for the first time since shooting Marcus Gentry, Penelope felt something other than fear and shame. She felt hope, she felt desired, she felt loved. The next 3 days passed in a strange mixture of tension and intimacy. Jack maintained a constant watch on the trails below, while Yates scouted the surrounding area, making sure Cole and his men weren't attempting to circle around. During the long hours of waiting, Penelope and Yates talked, sharing their histories and their dreams. She learned that Yates had come to California from Missouri 10 years earlier, running from a father who drank and used his fists too freely. He'd found work as a guide and hunter, learning the mountains and making a name for himself as someone who could be trusted to get people safely through dangerous territory. He'd saved his money carefully, dreaming of the day he could buy land and build something permanent. "I always thought I'd do it alone," he admitted as they sat together watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. "I didn't trust anyone enough to let them into my life. People always let you down, betray you, leave you. The mountains don't do that." "But you're trusting me," Penelope said. "You're different. You've been through fire and come out stronger. You don't flinch from hard truths. You face what needs to be faced." He took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "I trust you because I see myself in you. Neither of us had an easy path, but we kept walking anyway." Penelope told him about her childhood in Ohio, the daughter of a failed farmer who'd drunk away what little money they had. Her mother had died when she was 12, and she'd raised her younger siblings until they were old enough to leave. Her father had arranged the marriage to the San Francisco merchant without asking her, seeing it as a way to ensure her security. When the merchant rejected her, her father had washed his hands of her entirely, saying she'd shamed the family. "I thought coming to Randsburg would give me a fresh start," she said. "I thought I could work hard and save money and maybe eventually buy a little piece of land where I could grow things, be self-sufficient. I never imagined I'd end up killing a man and running into the mountains." "Life rarely goes the way we plan," Yates said, "but sometimes the detours lead somewhere better than the original destination." On the 4th day, Jack spotted movement on the trail below. A single rider moving slowly, carrying a white cloth tied to a stick. Yates watched through his spyglass, then handed it to Jack. "It's Cole," Jack said, "riding alone under a flag of truce." "Could be a trap," Yates replied. "Cover me. If anything moves in those rocks, shoot it." He made his way down the trail, rifle in hand, moving with the silent grace of a mountain lion. Penelope watched from the shelter, her heart in her throat. She couldn't hear what was said, But she saw Yates and Cole talking, saw the outlaw gesturing angrily, saw Yates standing firm and immovable as the mountain itself. The conversation lasted maybe 10 minutes. Then Cole wheeled his horse around and rode away at a gallop. Yates climbed back up to the shelter, his face unreadable. "Well?" Jack asked. It's over. I told him Marcus got what he deserved, and if he wanted revenge, he'd have to go through me to get it. I also told him I knew where his camp was, knew the identities of every man riding with him, and that if anything happened to Penelope or to me, I'd made arrangements for that information to reach the territorial marshal." Yates looked at Penelope. "He's not stupid. He knows the law's been looking for him, and he knows I'm not bluffing about the information. He said he'd let it go, that Marcus wasn't worth dying for." "Can we trust him?" Penelope asked. "We can trust his self-interest. Cole Gentry cares about staying alive and staying free more than he cares about avenging his brother. He'll move on to easier prey." Yates smiled, and it transformed his hard face into something warm and almost boyish. "You're safe now." The relief was so overwhelming that Penelope's legs gave out. Yates caught her before she hit the ground, lifting her easily in his powerful arms. "Easy," he murmured against her hair. "It's over. You're safe. I've got you." She clung to him, tears soaking into his shirt. All the fear and tension of the past week poured out of her in great heaving sobs. Yates held her through it all, his arms a fortress around her, his deep voice murmuring reassurances. When the storm of emotion finally passed, Penelope pulled back, embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I don't usually fall apart like that." "You've earned the right to fall apart," Yates said gently. He set her on her feet but kept his hands on her waist, steadying her. "You've been through hell. You're allowed to feel it." Jack tactfully busied himself with packing up their camp. "If we leave now, we can make it down to the lower cabin by nightfall. I don't know about you two, but I'm ready for a real bed and a hot meal." They descended the mountain as the sun began its journey toward the horizon. Penelope felt as if she were leaving one life behind and entering another. The woman who had climbed up this trail 4 days ago was not the same woman descending now. That woman had been alone, afraid, convinced she was ruined and unwanted. This woman had a future, had a man who loved her, had hope. The cabin in the lower valley was exactly as they'd left it. Jack immediately began preparing a celebration meal, pulling out supplies he'd been hoarding. "If we're having a wedding, we need a proper engagement feast," he declared, refusing to hear any protests. That night, they ate roasted venison and beans and cornbread with wild honey. Jack produced a bottle of whiskey from somewhere, and they toasted to Penelope and Yates's future. As the fire burned low and Jack excused himself to check on the horses, giving them privacy, Yates pulled Penelope into his lap. "I need to go back down to Randsburg tomorrow," he said. "I need to make sure Cole kept his word and moved on, and I need to arrange for a preacher to come up here, if you still want to marry me." "I want to marry you," Penelope said firmly. She traced the line of his jaw, feeling the roughness of his beard beneath her fingers. "But are you sure about this? You could have any woman you want. You don't have to settle for someone damaged." Yates's eyes flashed with anger, but not at her. "Don't ever say that again. You're not damaged. You're strong. You survived things that would break most people, and you came through with your courage and your kindness intact. That's not damage. That's strength." He kissed her then, deep and possessive, his hands moving over her body with proprietary confidence. Penelope melted into him, all her doubts burned away by the heat of his desire. When he pulled back, his breathing was ragged. "I want you," he said roughly, "but I'll wait until we're properly married. You deserve to be treated with respect." Penelope appreciated his restraint, even as her body ached for more. "How long will it take to get a preacher up here?" "A week, maybe 2. "That's a long time to wait." Yates groaned. "You're not making this easy." "I don't want to make it easy. I want you just as much as you want me." She kissed him again, pouring all her longing into it. "But I'll wait, because you're worth waiting for." They spent the rest of the evening wrapped in each other's arms by the fire, talking about their future. Yates told her about a piece of land he'd been eyeing, a valley with a stream and good grazing and enough timber to build a proper house. "We could have cattle, horses, maybe some chickens, build a real home." I'd like that, Penelope said. I've never had a real home before, not one that was truly mine. Ours, Yates corrected. Everything I have, everything I am, is yours now. The simplicity and sincerity of the statement made her throat tight with emotion. She'd spent so long believing she was unwanted, unworthy of love, that having this man offer her everything felt almost unreal. Yates left for Randsburg at first light, promising to be back within 3 days. Penelope stayed at the cabin with Jack, helping with the daily chores and trying not to worry. Jack proved to be good company, telling stories about his and Yates's adventures in the mountains and making her laugh with his dry humor. "He's a good man," Jack said one evening as they prepared dinner. "Best I've ever known. He's saved my life more times than I can count, and he's never asked for anything in return except loyalty." "How long have you known him?" 5 years. I was working a played-out claim down in the valley, about to starve, when he came through. He gave me food, offered me work, treated me like an equal even though I had nothing. Not many men would do that. Jack looked at her seriously. "You're good for him. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. He needs someone to come home to, someone to build a life with. He's been alone too long." "I need him too," Penelope admitted. "He makes me feel like I matter, like I'm worth something." "You are worth something, never doubt that." Yates returned on the 3rd day, as promised, with news that transformed everything. "Cole and his men have cleared out, moved north toward Oregon, and I talked to the sheriff in Randsburg. He's agreed to officially close the investigation into Marcus Gentry's death as justified self-defense. You're completely cleared." Penelope sagged with relief. "So I can go back?" "If you want to, but I was hoping you'd want to stay up here with me instead." Yates pulled her close. "I've also arranged for Reverend Thomas from the church in Johannesburg to come up here in 5 days. He's willing to perform the ceremony if you're still willing to marry a rough mountain man." "I'm willing," Penelope said, rising on her toes to kiss him. "More than willing." Those 5 days passed in a blur of preparation. Penelope washed and mended her best dress, the one she'd worn for the failed meeting with her intended in San Francisco. It was simple brown calico, but she added lace at the collar and cuffs that she'd been saving. Jack rode down to the nearest trading post and returned with supplies, including a small gold ring that Yates had commissioned from a prospector who did metalwork. The Reverend arrived on a cool morning, riding a mule and accompanied by 2 witnesses from Johannesburg. He was an older man with kind eyes and a gentle manner, and he seemed unfazed by the rustic setting. They were married in the clearing in front of the cabin, with the mountains rising majestically behind them and the pine trees witnessing their vows. Penelope wore her mended dress and wildflowers in her hair that Jack had gathered. Yates wore clean buckskins and had trimmed his beard, but he was still the same powerful, protective man she'd fallen in love with. When Reverend Thomas asked if she took Yates to be her husband, Penelope's voice rang out clear and strong. "I do." And when Yates slid the simple gold ring onto her finger and promised to love and protect her for the rest of his days, she saw tears in his green eyes that matched her own. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Thomas said with a smile. Yates pulled her into his arms and kissed her with a passion that made the witnesses chuckle. When he finally released her, Penelope was breathless and blushing. "My wife," Yates said wonderingly, as if testing the words. "My husband," she replied, and the rightness of it settled into her bones. They celebrated with a feast that Jack had prepared, and the Reverend blessed their union with prayers and scripture. As evening fell and their guests prepared to leave, Yates pulled Penelope aside. "Are you happy?" he asked, his hands framing her face. "Happier than I've ever been," she answered honestly. "You've given me everything I never knew I needed." That night, alone in the cabin for the first time, Yates made love to his new wife with a tenderness that belied his powerful frame. He took his time learning her body, worshiping her with his hands and mouth until she was gasping his name. When he finally joined their bodies, Penelope felt complete in a way she'd never imagined possible. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, listening to his heart beat strong and steady, she whispered, "I love you." "I love you too," Yates rumbled, his arms tightening around her. "Forevermore, just like I promised." The first year of their marriage passed in hard work and simple joys. Yates purchased the land he'd been eyeing, and together they built a sturdy house in the valley. Penelope proved to be an excellent partner, working alongside him to clear fields and plant crops. She learned to hunt and fish, to preserve food and tan hides, to survive and thrive in the mountain wilderness. Jack became a frequent visitor, building his own small cabin nearby and helping with the larger projects. Other settlers began moving into the valley, drawn by the good land and the protection that Yates's presence provided. Outlaws gave the area a wide berth, knowing that the mountain man who lived there was not to be trifled with. Penelope started a small garden, growing vegetables and herbs. She learned which wild plants were edible and which had medicinal properties. The other women in the growing community sought her advice and friendship, and slowly she built a network of connections that had been missing from her life in Randsburg. But it was in the privacy of their home, in the arms of her husband, that Penelope truly flourished. Yates was everything she'd never dared to hope for in a partner: strong but gentle, protective but respectful, passionate but patient. He made her laugh with his dry humor and cry with his unexpected tenderness. He treated her like she was precious, like her thoughts and opinions mattered, like she was an equal partner in their life together. In the spring of their second year together, Penelope realized she was pregnant. She told Yates one evening as they sat on the porch of their house, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple. His face transformed with joy. "A baby?" "A baby," she confirmed, laughing at his expression. "Are you happy?" Yates swept her into his arms, kissing her soundly. "Happy doesn't even begin to cover it. You've given me everything, Penelope. A home, a life, and now a child. I'm the luckiest man alive." Their son was born in November, a healthy baby boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's gray eyes. They named him James, after Yates's brother who had died young. Yates held his son with his massive hands so gentle it made Penelope's heart ache, and she saw tears on his weathered face as he counted the baby's tiny fingers and toes. "He's perfect," Yates whispered. "You're perfect. I don't know what I did to deserve this, but I'm grateful every single day." Motherhood suited Penelope. She took to it with the same determination she'd applied to everything else, learning quickly and adapting easily. Yates was a devoted father, frequently carrying James in a sling across his broad chest as he went about his work. The sight of her powerful mountain man husband cradling their tiny son never failed to make Penelope's heart swell with love. As James grew from baby to toddler, the valley community grew as well. A general store opened, then a church, then a school. Penelope found herself becoming a respected member of the community, known for her practical wisdom and her kindness. No one in the valley knew about Marcus Gentry or the shooting in Randsburg. Here, she was simply Mrs. Yager, wife of the mountain man, mother of young James. When James was 3, a second son arrived, whom they named Henry. And 2 years after that, a daughter they called Rose. Each child was welcomed with joy, and their house rang with laughter and life. Yates expanded the house twice to accommodate their growing family, and Penelope's garden grew to feed them all. On their 10th anniversary, Yates took Penelope back up to the cabin where they had first acknowledged their love for each other. Jack stayed with the children, and for 3 days they had only each other, reliving those early desperate days and marveling at how far they'd come. "Do you ever regret it?" Penelope asked as they lay together in the small bunk, wrapped in furs against the mountain cold. "Marrying me? Taking on my troubles? Giving up your solitary life?" Yates turned to face her, his green eyes serious in the firelight. "Not for 1 second. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Penelope. You turned a lonely existence into a life worth living. You gave me purpose, family, love. I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. Even the part where we got shot at by outlaws. Even that part. Because it brought you to me, and I wouldn't change a single moment if it meant losing you." They made love with the same passion they'd shared on their wedding night, and Penelope marveled that after 10 years and 3 children, she still wanted him with the same desperate intensity. Yates still looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the world, still touched her with reverence and desire, still made her feel wanted and cherished. The years continued to pass, marked by seasons and harvests, by their children growing and the valley community prospering. Yates's reputation as a fair and honest man brought people to the valley seeking his guidance in disputes. He became an unofficial leader, respected and trusted by all who knew him. Penelope opened a small school in their home, teaching the valley children to read and write. She loved watching their minds open to new ideas, loved seeing their confidence grow as they mastered new skills. Some of the older women in the community, women who'd never had the chance to learn, shyly asked if they could join the lessons. Penelope welcomed them all, creating a place where knowledge was shared freely and everyone was valued. When James turned 18, tall and strong like his father, he announced his intention to head into the mountains himself, to work as a guide like Yates had done. Penelope's heart ached at the thought of him leaving, but Yates clapped his son on the shoulder with pride. "You'll do well," Yates said. "You've got good instincts and a strong back. But remember, it's lonely work. When you find someone worth coming home to, don't hesitate. Grab hold with both hands and don't let go." "Like you did with Ma?" James asked with a grin. "Exactly like that. Your mother's the smartest decision I ever made." Henry chose to stay in the valley, working the land and building his own house near theirs. And Rose, their daughter, proved to have a gift for healing. She apprenticed with the valley doctor, learning medicine and midwifery. Penelope watched her children forge their own paths with pride and a bittersweet awareness that time was moving forward relentlessly. On their 20th anniversary, Yates took Penelope on a ride through the valley, showing her all they'd built together. The fields were green and productive. The community was thriving, and their children were grown and happy. They stopped at the spot where their house stood, looking out over the land they'd worked so hard to cultivate. "I want you to know something," Yates said, taking her hand. "Every day with you has been a gift. You took a lonely, angry man and taught him how to love, how to hope, how to build something lasting. You're everything to me, Penelope. You always have been." "You saved me too," she replied, tears in her eyes. "When no man wanted me, when I thought I was worthless, you saw value in me. You gave me a home, a family, a life worth living. I love you more now than I did the day we married." "I want you forevermore," Yates said, echoing the words he'd spoken so long ago in that mountain cabin. And you have me," Penelope whispered. "Forevermore." They stood together as the sun set over their valley, two people who'd found each other in the wilderness and built a life from nothing but determination and love. Around them, the community they'd helped create went about its evening routines. Children played, families gathered for dinner, and life continued in the rhythm they'd established. Years continued to pass, and eventually grandchildren arrived. James married a woman from Randsburg, a pretty girl with a quick wit who reminded Penelope of herself in younger days. They had 3 children, and James built a cabin in the high country where he ran a successful guiding business. Henry married a neighboring farmer's daughter and gave Penelope and Yates 4 more grandchildren who lived close enough to visit daily. And Rose married the young doctor she'd trained under, and they established a clinic in the valley that served the entire region. Yates's hair turned gray and his movements became slower, but he remained strong and vital well into his 60s. Penelope's face lined with age, but Yates still looked at her with the same desire and love he'd shown when they first met. They spent their evenings on the porch of their house, watching the sunset and counting their blessings. "We did good," Yates said one evening, his large hand enveloping hers. "Built something that'll last beyond us." "We did," Penelope agreed. "I never imagined this life was possible for me. I thought I'd die alone and unwanted in that room above the general store in Randsburg. Instead, I got you, got this life, got to see what love really means." "That night I knocked on your door was the best decision I ever made," Yates said. "I told myself I was just warning you about danger, but the truth is I saw something in you that I recognized. I saw strength and courage hiding behind fear and loneliness. I saw a woman worth fighting for. And I saw a man who made me feel safe for the first time in my life, who made me feel wanted." Penelope squeezed his hand. "You kept your promise, Yates Yager. You wanted me forevermore, and you showed it every single day." As the years advanced into their 70s, they slowed down but never stopped. They still took walks together through the valley, still sat on their porch talking for hours, still shared a bed and held each other through the night. Their love had only deepened with time, weathered by trials and strengthened by years of partnership. One spring morning, Yates didn't wake up. He died peacefully in his sleep, his arms around Penelope as they had been for nearly 50 years. The valley mourned the loss of the man who'd helped shape their community, but Penelope's grief was beyond measure. She'd lost her husband, her partner, her great love. At the funeral, attended by hundreds of people whose lives Yates had touched, Penelope stood straight and strong despite her tears. She spoke of the man who'd saved her, who'd loved her when no one else would, who'd given her a life beyond her wildest dreams. "He whispered that he wanted me forevermore," she said, her voice carrying across the assembled mourners. "And he kept that promise until his last breath. I was the luckiest woman in the world to have been loved by Yates Yager." She lived another 5 years without him, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She remained active in the community, teaching until the very end, sharing the wisdom she'd accumulated over a long and full life. But everyone could see that part of her had gone with Yates, that she was waiting patiently to join him. When she died quietly one winter evening, her family found her with a smile on her face and a letter clutched in her hand. It was a letter Yates had written to her years earlier, on their 25th anniversary. James read it aloud at her funeral, his voice breaking with emotion. "My dearest Penelope, I am not a man of fancy words, but I need you to know what you mean to me. You are the breath in my lungs, the beat of my heart, the reason I wake up grateful every morning. You took a man who thought he would spend his life alone and gave him a family, a home, a purpose. You are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. When you whispered that no man had ever wanted you, my heart broke for all the fools who couldn't see your worth. I want you forevermore, and I will love you beyond death itself. Your devoted husband, Yates." They buried her next to Yates under a large pine tree, overlooking the valley they'd built together. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren stood together, bound by the legacy of love and strength that Penelope and Yates had created. The valley prospered for generations, and the story of the mountain man and the woman he saved became legend. People told it to their children as an example of true love, of how two broken people had found each other in the wilderness and built something beautiful from the ashes of their pasts. The house Yates built stood for over a century, eventually becoming a historical landmark. Visitors came from far away to see where the Yager family had started, to walk through the rooms where children had been raised and love had flourished. The story of Penelope Parker, who killed a man in self-defense and thought she was ruined, and Yates Yager, the mountain man who saw her worth when no one else would, inspired countless others. Because in the end, their story wasn't just about survival in the harsh western mountains. It was about two people who refused to let their circumstances define them, who chose love over fear, who built a life of meaning and purpose from absolutely nothing. It was about the transformative power of being wanted, being seen, being loved completely and without reservation. In the valley that still bears their name, where their descendants still live and work the land, people remember the mountain man who was strong enough to be gentle and the woman who was brave enough to accept his love. They remember the promise he made, that he wanted her forevermore, and how he kept that promise every single day of his life. And on quiet evenings when the sun sets over the mountains and the wind whispers through the pines, some say you can still feel their presence in the valley, two souls bound together for eternity, their love as enduring as the mountains themselves. Their story became more than just a tale told around fires or written in history books. It became a testament to the truth that love can find you in the most unexpected places, that worth is not defined by others' opinions, and that the right person will see you truly and want you completely forevermore.